Welcome back to Briggs on Book, our Briggs on Books. I'm the host, Mike Briggs, our truly international talk show. Our last guest was from Canada. Our upcoming guest is in Florida, and just a fascinating book. Our guest is, let's bring her up. Let me see if I can find her. There she is, Rebecca Waters. R.M. Waters is the author. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, the Book of Jezebel. That sounds like a historic, like a biblical time name. Is that right, or is that the story?
Yeah. Yes, it is. It is the Jezebel from the books of Kings and Chronicles in the Old Testament, and also the Jewish Tanakh does not call it the Old Testament for obvious reasons. I think if you know about the history, and also in the Midrash, her story is mentioned. She was a real historic queen who ruled alongside her husband, King Ahab, who was the actual king of Israel. This is at a time when Israel is split into two kingdoms. We've got the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And her husband ruled in the northern kingdom. And she came from actually Phoenicia, which is what we call it today. In her time, she would have been just known as a Canaanite or a Sidonian. But she was, they were real historical people. How much is true about their story in the Bible is up for debate, but there's a lot of, evidence archaeologically that, shows they were real people, and a lot of the stories are probably true.
Probably true, right? Now, this is a novel, so tell me, what path does this take that would be different from just reading it in the Bible?
Well, it takes a very different path because, first of all, the Bible is written from the perspective of people who hated Jezebel because she worshipped Canaanite gods, Baal, or Baal, actually is how it's really pronounced, and Ashtart. I spell it Ashtarti because it's the Greek spelling has an E at the end, which suggests linguistically it should have an E sound at the end. And the Phoenicians instead of pronouncing it Astarte, they would have had the sh sound. So those were her gods, and they are very different than the God of Israel. So she was very much not liked by the people who wrote the books we have in the Bible today. But she was, from what they can tell, pretty popular in her time because she brought her gods into Israel. Well, they were kind of already there. This was a time when polytheism was sort of still a thing, but it was starting to go out, and we had this the worshipers of Yahweh who wanted to say he was the only God, so they didn't like her because she's now coming into the kingdom. When she marries Ahab, she's probably between 12 and 15, which is very disturbing, but in the time it was quite normal. So I put her age at 14 because it was really challenging. I have a daughter who's literally 15, so I'm thinking, oh gosh, they should not get married or do that stuff. But she would have been very powerful when she came in, and that was one reason she wasn't liked. So what makes my book different? This book is told from her perspective. She is the speaker, the narrator, so it's in first person perspective, and she's telling the story from her belief system. It's kind of like how she sees the world, how she sees herself. I have sort of a love story between her and Ahab, because I think that part of why Ahab accepted her so much would have been he must have really cared about her deeply. She had a lot of power and control in a way that people in Israel weren't used to women having. And she really did rule alongside him, and was very different than all the queens they've had before. So
it seems like an awful lot of research had to be done to do this. Do you have a background in this Old Testament stuff?
Well, I didn't study the Old Testament, officially, but I've done a ton of research, of course, into the Canaanite culture and religion, into ancient or Iron Age Israel. I researched their laws and stuff like that. So I did a lot of research. I've done a lot of reading archaeological stuff from now, studying their religions, especially the Canaanite religion that Jezebel followed, because it's very different than anything we know today. What we know of it mostly comes from the Bible and a few archaeological finds, but most of it's unreadable because there's a handful of people who can read Akkadian, which would have been the language it was all written in back then.
I'm excited about this book. I'm a historian. I love to read history. I've always wanted to know about that old Israel stuff, the Canaanites and these different tribes and stuff, which I've never understood. So this might be a good entry point.
Yeah, it would be. And the reason it's so thick
Oh, yeah,
is
show us this
because,
thick book.
yeah, yeah, it is. It's very big. It's about 700, little over 700 pages of reading. I might end up splitting it into the three parts into 3 books at some point. But yeah, I go into a lot of detail. My editor was very firm about, no, you need more detail, because you're a writer. You're being told constantly, be concise. Don't make it too long. Don't be, heavy worded. And I do have a tendency to be that way, as you might be able to tell now. So I worked hard to try not to, go into too much detail. I didn't want to sound like Tolkien describing the curtains in the room. But she was like, no, this is a world nobody knows.
Yeah.
So try your best to describe it. And so a lot of detail goes into her religious beliefs and how she practices it, because I believe she was a priestess of her religion, which a lot of royal women were, which is also more why she had so much power and was very threatening to the people who didn't like her gods. Yeah. And their religion was very interesting. Baal and Ashtarte are basically, for lack of a better word, they are sex gods, pretty much. I mean, fertility and stuff like that. So there's a lot of blood and sex rites that were hugely unpopular to the Israeli people.
Now, besides nerds like me who like to read, histories and stuff, who will want to read this book? Who should read it?
Well, definitely history nerds. We are probably the biggest readers, but honestly, people who want to read about powerful women in history, having their getting their voice back and kind of being able to tell their own thing. People who like romance. It's not a romance novel, but there's a heavy amount of romance in it. There's some descriptive parts. Anyone who really, knows a lot about the Bible might want to read it too. I have a lot of interest from Catholic friends, surprisingly, and I was a little nervous at first, you might not like my depiction of Jezebel, because she's not depicted as the bad guy. I try to be fair, but she is going to be who she is, as a person. And but a lot of them really want to read it, and they're interested in my retelling of her story from a different perspective. So anyone who's into women's history, and it's Women's History Month, that is
there you
just
go. That's right.
Yeah.
Well,
so people who like ancient history too.
700, I mean, that's not too long. I've certainly read long. We didn't get a good look at the book. I put the cover up, but go ahead and hold it up again and hold it sideways. And
it's got the strip across, because this is actually just the, it's a proof copy for me to check it, make sure it prints right. I've ordered my copies. I'm waiting for them to come, but it's very thick. And here's her seal on the back.
Yeah.
And
let's talk. I was going to ask you about that seal. Let me put it up on the screen here. Now, this is a real thing.
Yes, that is real archaeological find. It was found among a bunch of seals that had been in the hands of a private collector, and nobody really knew whose it was. No one ever took the time when it was in their hands to find out who it was. And then they were looking at it, and they looked closely at it, and they realized it's got Phoenician writing on it, which actually in the way back before the Assyrian conquest, that was the alphabet that was in use even in Israel. And it has the letters of her name, most of them. It's got YZBL. And the only thing that's missing is the Aleph that is at the start of her name. And they're pretty sure it would be at the top where you can see it's broken. That's where it would have had probably an Al and the Aleph and everything that would have said belonging to Jezebel. So they're pretty sure it's hers. It's bigger than all the other seals they found it with. It's made out of opal, which is even today a very expensive stone. And so it's covered in Egyptian symbolism that was very popular in Phoenicia at that time period and everything. And, it's just really cool. It's got, so basically, it's going to say for a lot about Jezebel's character. You can actually glean a lot from at least how she would have seen herself. So I, in my book, have her not just be a priestess who becomes a high priestess. She believes and has been raised to believe that she is the incarnation of her goddess. So
Tell us
that
when
I,
tell us when Jezebel lived. What?
oh, 9th century BCE. So a very long time
Yeah.
ago. The Iron Age, way, way back. This would have been like the 800s BC. So, ancient Egypt was still a thing back then. It's
Yeah.
very different world. So
Yeah.
there's not a lot of archaeological record of that times, which on the one hand is disappointing because it makes it challenging when I'm trying to be as historically accurate as possible. On the other hand, it gives me a little bit of freedom that I might not have if I'm like writing about somebody from the 1800s,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I got to say this is one of the most exciting things that I've heard about this book. Like I said, but I'm kind of a nerd like that. But I think a lot of people would enjoy it. Like we talked before we came on the air, I can't get through that Old Testament Bible, just so much. But here's a way to be really introduced to a period that is in there.
Yeah, thank you. I know. I try to make it sort of. Sometimes it almost could read like a lost book of the Bible, but not in a boring way, I promise. Because it's very modern. I mean, I'm a modern person. I can't help but make it, it's a Jezebel for today. I try to make her as authentic for her time as possible. But there's a lot of introspection. She's a very deep thinking person, which for a priestess who's well educated could very well have been. And so there's a lot of exposition, but not in a bad way, because she's describing her world that we don't know.
Tell me, I know, I'm getting the signal. We're way past time, but that's too fascinating for me. But we have your web address. What will people find on your website?
Oh gosh, I've got my blog. I'm horrible at keeping up with it, but I do have my blog. So I've got some interviews on there where I talk a little bit more about the book. They're written interviews, so I'm able to really think about what I'm saying. I've got poetry. It's not the best, but I've got another book that's coming out eventually. I'm working on it in my MFA class. Mm-hmm. That's a little bit of detail is up there about that, and my about the author if people are interested. It's got. Nice. I'm kind of wild and crazy. I'm very serious here. I can get like really silly and playful. So nice.
Can you give us an idea what the subject of your next book will be?
I'm actually switching to fantasy. Mm-hmm. I write historical and fantasy fiction. Nice. So I'll be writing a book about a vampire. It's actually from the perspective of the vampire hunter, but the vampire is not your usual vampire because she's going to turn out, it's a female vampire hunter who is trying to rescue her brother, who the vampire has taken as a thrall. Mm-hmm. And it's going to take a twist that you wouldn't expect, though, because the vampire hunter and the vampire are going to come to see eye to eye.
Nice.
In a way that people wouldn't normally expect.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Again, we're way past time. Any last thoughts for our viewers?
No, just the book is available on Amazon, and if you like it, please leave a review because it's my first book, and I don't have a following yet, so.
Very good.
It'll be good to have one.
All right. The author R.M. Waters or Rebecca Waters, is that right?
Yeah.
The Book of Jezebel is the book. Just go to the Amazon. I got so much out of just going there and looking at it and reading about the book. It's very exciting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you again for having me. It's been really wonderful to have this opportunity.
Very good. And for our viewers, don't go anywhere because we'll be back with another author in just a couple of minutes. Thank you, R.M. Waters, and we'll be back with more right after this.
Thank you.